Thank you. It's good to be back in Pinellas County, and I'm always happy to be joined by our Attorney General, Ashley Moody. And we also have our Surgeon General, Dr. Joe Latipo is here. We've got a lot of people who are behind us that are joining us as well. We'll also hear from some other folks that have some personal stories. But at the end of the day, we're here to announce that we need to take action to protect Florida jobs. And we have a situation now, unfortunately, in our country where we have a federal government that is very much trying to use the heavy hand of government to force a lot of these injections. And you have a lot of folks that actually believe that that decision should be theirs, and that we believe in having basic medical freedom and individual choice, and that your right to earn a living should not be contingent upon COVID shots. Amen. And so that's what we need. Now, we were, when the vaccines came out, we worked very hard to provide it, particularly to our elderly, but we said from day one, we'll make it available for all, but we will mandate it on none, because ultimately we wanted individuals to make the determinations about what was right for them. And so you hear a lot about this OSHA mandate that's coming down the pike. That's something that I've said we're going to contest, and we will. There's also mandates that potentially could have devastating effects on the state of Florida. One is a federal contractor mandate. Anybody that contracts with the federal government, they're imposing this mandate, and that is already putting thousands and thousands of jobs in jeopardy. And so if you think about it, we have a lot of contractors in the state of Florida that help defense and space and all these key things. A lot of great employees, a lot of great Floridians are working in these things, and yet they're now getting kicked to the curb. But the situation where if they don't comply, then they would lose out on getting any contracts, which is the basic way they do business. And so it's a really, really bad situation. So the Attorney General and we are working. Now, we want to contest that contractor mandate in court as well. We got to make sure we have the right plaintiff in terms of what we can do. A lot of these contractors probably aren't going to do it themselves because they know there'll be reprisals if they do it. But that has an impact on thousands and thousands of people in the state of Florida. So we're going to be doing that. We're also, when it comes out, going to be contesting the mandate that they're going to impose on hospitals through CMS, where they're basically saying if you don't do forced injections, then you lose Medicare, Medicaid funding. Well, none of these healthcare providers would be able to even function, particularly in a state like Florida where most of their patients are on Medicare. And so we think that's illegal, that's wrong, and so we're going to be doing that as well. And that's important what the federal government is doing, but it's not just limited to that. You have some of these businesses that are doing things that I think violate what's decent. You have agencies in state government, or not state government, but local government, even though we've made very clear you can't fire people based on this, they're doing it. We have someone from Orange County Fire who's about what's happened to him. And a lot of the employers are not honoring the exemptions for religious beliefs or health concerns that are in federal law. And so we have an opportunity here to take additional action. I think we have to do it. I think we have got to stand up for people's jobs and their livelihoods. Yes. So what we're going to be doing, in addition to mounting aggressive legal challenges to federal mandates, we're also going to be taking legislative action to add protections for people in the state of Florida. And that's something that cannot wait until the regular legislative session next year. It needs to happen soon. And so we will be calling the legislature back for a special session. We want to make sure that individuals in Florida have their livelihoods and their jobs protected. And I think that this is something, when we were doing the last legislative session, it would never have occurred to me that we would be in the situation that we are with some of the insanity that's raining down right now. We took very strong action against things like vaccine passports. That was the right decision to do because we didn't want people to be having their freedom circumscribed based on showing papers. And we really nipped that whole issue in the bud here in Florida. But then now you have this where you have these aggressive potential mandates, which could potentially lead to many people losing their jobs. Some have already been terminated, and we need to provide protections. One of the things that's frustrating to me is when COVID hit and we started to grapple with it, there was a fear that COVID was going to become ripe for litigation. That'd be a litigation bonanza, that someone would sue a business and say, well, someone got COVID while in your operation, therefore, and that's not how we've ever treated respiratory viruses before. It's a pathogen that's airborne. It's not anyone's fault. It's just something that unfortunately you have to deal with. But we didn't think that businesses should be getting sued over this, and so we provided probably the strongest COVID liability protection anywhere in the country very early on, and we were glad to do that, and I think that that was something that allowed a lot of businesses to breathe a sigh of relief. But I must say that having done that, to now see some of those same businesses who were complaining about potential liability turn around and want to fire employees over these injections, I kind of feel like they're stabbing us in the back after we were standing up for them. And so we're going to be pursuing a number of protections for employees. First of all, if you think about it, if anyone has been forced to do an injection and has an adverse reaction, that business should be liable for that. Any damages, there's just, you have to do it because that's on them. It wasn't an individual choice. I also think this COVID liability protection that was given, the minute you go and start mandating, that liability protection is going to go by the wayside for each individual business that makes the decision to fire people or to do any of that. And I know some of them have already done it. So we're going to make sure that we beef that up. It's also the case some of these people have recently been fired, and then they're viewed as having been fired for cause, and then they're now ineligible for reemployment assistance. We're going to make sure that those are not for cause and make sure we provide people a lifeline. But at the end of the day, you shouldn't be discriminated against based on based on your health decisions. And so we want to provide protection for people. We want to make it clear that in Florida, your right to earn a living is not contingent upon whatever choices you're making in terms of these injections. And I think that that's going to go a long way to let people know that we have your back. Some people say, well, why don't you just issue an edict? It's not the way a constitutional system works. COVID, you had governors issuing a lot of unconstitutional edicts. We're not under a state of emergency in Florida. I don't have the authority to just dictate. That's why you need to have the legislature come in. You actually have to pass legislation. You can enshrine protections into law. We can make sure that we're looking out for folks. And here's the thing. On a principled basis, we have the responsibility to stand up for people's individual rights and individual freedom and make sure that in the state of Florida, people can make those decisions. I think it's very, very important. It's also important for us to take a stand. If we have unconstitutional mandates coming down from the federal government, we have a responsibility to fight back and defend the constitutional system, and we'll do it. But I also know, just on a very practical level, this is not something, these forced shots, this is not something that's going to be good for Florida's economy. We have a lot of folks in very key industries. We're here at the hangar because we got a lot of folks in the airlines that are back there who are absolutely instrumental in America's economy, particularly Florida's economy, because we're the #1 tourist destination in the United States. August 2021, our hotel revenue was up 11% over pre-COVID August of 2019, even though the nation as a whole was down 5%. So we really, and yes, some people drive, but most people now fly into Florida. And so we need to have these airlines functioning. Losing some of these people is not going to be good for the state of Florida. Losing nurses is not going to be good for the state of Florida. Losing police officers or firefighters is not going to be good for the state of Florida. So we have to look at, yes, a freedom, very important, constitutional government, defending the Constitution, very important, but just on a practical basis, even if none of those concerns were things that really matter to you, this is not going to work well. And I think that's why you've seen some of these big businesses back off some of these mandates, because they realize that it's not something that is ultimately sustainable. And here's the thing, there are a lot of people that are fighting these mandates inside these businesses. I'll bet you some of them are vaccinated. They just, out of principle, do not want to have to show. Then there's others who probably aren't opposed to doing it, but they want it to be their individual choice, and they don't want it to be heavy-handed, brought down. Because it's not a free choice. If you say, get a shot or lose your job, that's not a free choice for a lot of people, because their livelihood's hanging in the balance. So there's a lot of things that are really, really important. And so I think if we're able to have the legislature come in, and we'll announce the precise dates. It'll be in November. I'm going to work with President Simpson and Speaker Sprowls to come in, to make sure that we're providing protections for people, to make sure that we're making sure, clarifying, we're in litigation on some of this stuff where we shouldn't be, to make sure, particularly these government agencies that have not followed the law, to make sure that we hold them accountable very quickly if they're firing people. I think it's something that needs to be done now. I don't think you can wait until next year, because I think a lot of these deadlines are coming up between now and the end of the year, where some of these people are going to get fired. And quite frankly, this would have been something we would have done last legislative session. If I honestly thought this would be something that would get this far, we would have made it a big priority. But I didn't think that this was something, because even Biden, remember, he said we would never mandate it. Remember he said that? We would never mandate it. That's what he said. And now he's in a situation where he's flip-flopped on that and is now doing. Fauci said you never mandate. Originally, Fauci said you can't mandate. Now Fauci is saying to mandate it. And so these guys are flip-flopping on this, and I think it's wrong. Now, as we bring the legislature back to provide protections for Floridians for their jobs, I think it's also important that we fortify parents' rights related to some of the things that we've been seeing going on. We've been winning these cases in court, and we'll win in the First Circuit DCA with respect to the Parents' Bill of Rights. But if you look at how that was drafted, it wasn't drafted with the idea that you would have subordinate government agencies just totally flout the law. The ability to enforce it, the teeth need to be strengthened. And so what I'm going to ask the legislature to do, yes, focus on protecting jobs, focus on making sure people's livelihoods are protected first and foremost. But while we're here, make sure that you're fortifying the Parents' Bill of Rights. I mean, we have a situation now in Florida where individual parents have not been provided their rights in a handful of counties. Most counties have done it. Pinellas has done a great job. You look around, we now in Florida have the lowest per capita COVID rate in the continental United States, okay? But that went from being at the top of a wave when all the schools came back in. Right as that was happening, all the colleges, we had sports stadiums full, all this stuff, and it's gone down 90%. And you have places like Pinellas in most counties where parents had the ability to make decisions about forcible masking or no masking. And then you had some others that forced masking and didn't let the parents make the decision. And it's gone down regardless. It's gone down everywhere. And so we know that. We know that that's what the data is telling us. So we need to make sure that we're doing it. I was very, very saddened and angry to be in Brevard County yesterday and hear a father talk about his young daughter with Down syndrome who has an exemption going into class, and they're forcibly tying a mask on her face with Down syndrome. That is wrong. And so the question is if these folks are not following the law, those parents need to have recourse. They need to go in and they need to be able to sue. They need to be able to get relief. and the perpetrators need to pay for their attorney's fees when they're doing it. We've got to hold people accountable, and it's like, you know, I could sit here and say, I tried to put, you know, great young judge on the Florida Supreme Court, a lady named Renata Francis, and we did it. We were about to do it. Someone sued over it, and there was like a procedural issue. I thought I was right. It went. And, you know, we lost in front of the Florida Supreme Court. So what am I going to do? I mean, like, we either have a system of government or we don't. And so we did. We made a different decision, another great judge, and we move on. But you have some of these people that they think that they're a law unto themselves. They don't think the parents should have a voice, and they don't think the interests of the child are more superior to whatever their political interests are. And we're going to make sure that we get that right-sized and make sure that people have the ability to defend parents and defend kids. So I think those two things will be very, very significant. But before you know, I say anymore, I wanted to bring in some folks who will be able to discuss about some of the issues that they're having to deal with, because sometimes you just hear about mandate and force this and that, and it's almost like the folks who are concerned about this, people don't want to talk about, or they don't want to give them the ability to explain kind of, you know, where they're coming from on some of this. And I think that's because it's counter to the narrative, and there's a lot of folks that don't want that being out there. But we're going to have some folks that are going to be able to speak about what they want. So first we have Kate, who's a registered nurse. She's new to Florida, and she's been a nurse for a decade. She has a daughter under 1, and she's currently pregnant, and she's worked for the VA. She'd like to return here in Florida. But this vaccination thing is actually causing problems with licensure in the District of Columbia that could affect her ability even to work in Florida. So I'm going to invite her up to tell her story. Kate?
Stand with the nurses.
Hi, I'm Kate Johnson, and I, like many people, am not out of reach of the long arms of government. So moving to Florida, I thought that my job would be safe, my protections would exist here, but DC has decided that by not complying with reporting my vaccine status to them, they are going to take action against my license and work to revoke my license, which would mean that I stand a very high risk of having my Florida license, which I just received, revoked. I recovered from COVID. I have natural immunity. I am pregnant. I have a daughter that I have been breastfeeding until recently, which maybe is TMI, but it is an important fact that there are special considerations that must be taken into account. And it seems that in this current climate, there's not any consideration given to people's medical exemptions, people's religious exemptions, people's overall perspective on some of these matters. And it's very concerning to me. The reason I'm really here is it's concerning to me that there are going to be so many patients who suffer as a result of this mandate. People need nurses. We are in a critical nursing shortage. And to take away, even if it's 5% of the workforce in a city like DC, where you are running on bare bones at all times, trying to get as many nurses as you possibly can to show up for work, to put a mandate like this in place and remove any percentage of nurses from the front lines is detrimental to patients' health. And as a nurse, I was recognized in every job I've ever held as an exemplary nurse, as a nurse who cares deeply for what happens to patients, what happens to the people of DC, what happens to the people of my new home in Florida. It is concerning to me that these mandates would put those people's lives in jeopardy. It was fine for nurses to put themselves in jeopardy when we didn't know anything about this virus. And now that we have clarity and we know that people with natural immunity have a very good chance of having maybe even better protection than people who are vaccinated, we're now not willing to provide them the opportunity to present that as proof that they are not a danger to their patients. It's very nice to be in a place where we have a governor who's willing to stand up for us, who believes that nurses matter, who believes that patients matter, who believes that we need to have frontline workers. So thank you, Governor DeSantis.
Thank you. And I think I think Kate is not unusual in terms of with a lot of the nurses, particularly the female nurses who are, in childbearing years. Some of them are pregnant, but some of them may be wanting to. Many of them, like Kate, have had COVID and recovered. So how should they lose their job if they're just making a judgment whether that's something that they think they want to do? Because in spite of what some people tell you who say they know everything, the fact of the matter is, we're going to find out more and more stuff as the years go on. And so to take that choice away from someone at the risk of their livelihood is just fundamentally wrong. And as Kate said, it is absolutely going to hurt patients because we already are in need to have more people. What I've said in Florida is, and obviously the CMS rule is going to put a lot of them under a gun, but if we can fight that back to allow people to work and not make this a precondition, that's going to benefit Florida, because you're going to have all these nurses that lose their jobs in these other states. They're going to want to come down here. We won't have a nurses shortage in Florida if we just respect their medical freedom and their ability to make decisions. So it's sad that we're even in this situation, but I think strategically, protecting people's rights and freedoms in this regard would actually redound to the benefit by getting more qualified people to come. Okay, we have Placido, who's an airline mechanic, and he has worked for American Airlines for 30 years. He and his family fled the Castro regime when he was 13 years old. He has family that were political prisoners in Cuba, and he is somebody that became an airplane mechanic for then Pan Am. When they went out of business, he got a job with American Airlines, and he's worked there for 3 decades. His daughter's going to medical school in Miami, and of course, he's paying tuition. He's had COVID as well, and he got the Regeneron, and that helped him a lot to be able to recover from that. And so now he's facing a situation where he could be on the chopping block. He could lose his job after 30 years. He's helping his daughter go to medical school. He's done everything right. He's lived the American dream, and now potentially could get kicked to the curb. So I'm going to let him come up.
First of all, I want to thank the governor. First of all, I want to thank the governor for giving us the opportunity to be here, and also I want to mention that we're praying for his family, his wife, and so she get well. I worked for American Airlines for 30 years, and now we're facing a deadline, and it's hard after 30 years of doing that proudly, and even with the COVID was really bad. We were essential workers, like the nurses, fire departments, police, and all that. We never stopped working. Here with me, there are co-workers and people from the airline here too. We also got the co-founder of American Freedom Flyers, and you should check that website too. They're helping us a lot. So saying that, I had COVID, and I was hospitalized in Baptist Hospital in Miami. I went through a lot. I was there, and thanks to the Lord and thanks to this man, governor next to me, I'm here today. He saved my life, and at the same time, a good friend of mine that we started together, he passed away because he couldn't get that. And now he's not here next to me. So this is a letter that I want to present to you from his wife,
Okay.
widow,
Thank
so
you.
you could read it.
Thank you.
Also, this is very personal to me because my whole family left Cuba. My whole family went to prison. They served 21 years, 19 years, 15 years in prison. We went to a lot. They sent them to this island of youth, and there they went through a lot. So anyway, growing up there, I remember my sister and myself being kids. They will come in and break the door, the back or the front, and search the house and take my father. My father lost a job because he was thinking differently. He didn't agree with the government, a dictatorship government. So now seeing what's going on here, I'm really scared. I'm really concerned. I couldn't sleep for 2.5 days with all these things that are happening now. And now I'm gonna lose the job over this. You guys better wake up.
Yes.
You guys better wake up. What's coming, I don't think is good. Thanks for the governor that we have here. That he's one man, but we are many to support him.
We must stand together.
And we're gonna stand together with him. And this applies for people that have the vaccine or not. I'm not against the vaccine. I'm for it. I'm against the mandate. That's all. So thank you very much, and God bless you all.
Okay, Stephen is the father of 2 young children and was the battalion chief from the Orange County Fire Rescue. He just lost his job because he refused to write up his fellow first responders for not complying with these mandates, which are not legal for the fire department in Orange County to do to begin with. And he served for 15 years. He's now without a job despite being an essential frontline worker and working tirelessly throughout the entire pandemic when many other people didn't necessarily want to be out and about working. He was there with everybody else in his department. And now his story's not over. We're going to help him. We're going to fight back on it. We don't think it was a lawful termination, but that's one of the reasons why we got to do a special session, because if they're trying to go and find some loophole, we're going to make sure that our laws are tight on this regard and that people like Stephen are protected from this unjust treatment. So, Stephen?
Yes.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Governor DeSantis. My name is Stephen Davis, and coming up on 4 years, I've been a battalion chief. 2 days ago, I was terminated for what I believe to be an unlawful order. The men and women that I serve in my battalion, Battalion 4, have spoken to me over the last several months, unable to sleep, worried about what would happen if they didn't get this shot, if they were mandated. Would they be able to provide for their families? Would it affect their medical? I've had a young lady tell me that she wasn't sure she would have children. Many people, men and women, were worried about this. Some were told if they didn't get this by a certain date, they would be terminated. So they complied, only to find out that that was a bluff. Now it's a written reprimand. I came in after a vacation day. I came into work and I was given a list of individuals. I looked at the individuals, this list, and there was no distinguishing between if they had the vaccination, if they didn't have it, if they had a religious exemption or a medical exemption. I looked at the list and I asked questions. I asked my leader, can we confirm these things? Can we confirm that these people are should be on this list? Personal conversations with several of them, I already knew that they had medical exemptions. I had personal conversations with several of them who said they had the vaccination. And yet I was ordered to give them reprimands. To me, this violated more than just a law. This violated their own civil rights. This violated the trust that these men and women have served over the last year and a half in the front lines. Unfortunately, I was brought in and relieved of duty that evening. A good friend of mine sat there with me, gathered all the information, and he was challenged the very next day and brought it forward. It was that next day that they stopped all the written reprimands. They pulled them all back. They said, do not issue until we figure this out. A week later, I was terminated for exactly what I told them. I tried to warn them. I have a great support system. My wife is my rock. We have 2 young boys, great soccer players, by the way. And I have an army behind me.
Yes, you got your back. We're standing with you, Chief.
I know people will follow me. I've got lots of support. My phone hasn't stopped ringing. I've never asked for this. But I want to say thank you to all those men and women who continue to call, continue to text. I'll get to you. Thank you, Governor. Thank you for everything you've done. I know in the end we will prevail, and this will be the end. We have to stand up, and we have to wake up, everyone. Yeah. Let's get this together. Thank you, sir.
You want that back? Okay. Well, thank you. And then, so Ashley Moody's going to talk about some of the legal options. I mean, basically, her and I have discussed, we're going to exhaust every legal option we have. We feel very, very strongly about a very quick and successful challenge if this OSHA rule ever gets promulgated, because they're just so far off from having any legitimate authority to do that mandate. We are the contractor one. We got to make sure they have the right plaintiff. We got to make sure that we can find it. Unfortunately, the federal government does have a lot of power over their contracts, but we're going to exhaust whatever we can there. And then the medical CMS, where they're threatening the Medicaid and Medicare funding, we're going to exhaust every legal avenue that we have there. So, Attorney General Moody.
Thank you, Governor DeSantis. You know, I'm a fifth-generation Floridian, and I have never been more proud to live in a state that fiercely protects its people with a common sense, pragmatic, amazing governor, but at the same time, fiercely protects Floridians' freedoms and the interests of this great state. I am proud to say today that we have taken action in Orange County to stand up for those first responders, and we have filed a brief in court to proudly stand with you, and you will always have an Attorney General and Governor that has your back. Always.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
You know, right as we speak, there are folks across this nation and in Florida that are being forced to upload papers to a database to show that they have been vaccinated. Think about that. We are in the United States of America, the free states of America, and we have folks having to upload documentation into databases because of the mandates of this federal government. It will not be tolerated in Florida or accepted. In every way possible, Governor DeSantis and I will push back against these unlawful and unwise mandates. Let's first start with the fact that how in the world can you go into a situation where you have an economy that depends on folks working and mandate where you are going to lose thousands of workers across the country. We're already seeing inflation. In fact, major corporations are announcing price increases as they're threatening the livelihoods of people's jobs. And our first responders in cities like Chicago and Seattle are being forced to resign when nationwide we are seeing unprecedented vacancies in the ranks of our law enforcement and first responders. That is dangerous. Absent-minded, and I can't believe a leader of the free country like the United States of America would ever get behind anything like that. Jen Psaki said recently that, you know, there's no precedent for this. There's not a lot of big precedent for this. Of course not. No president of the United States in history has mandated a federal vaccine on its people, ever. And so we will continue to push back in court. I am thankful to live in a state where I have a governor who understands what's at stake. And I am thankful to live in a state with folks like those behind me, folks like Chief Davis, who say, I will stand up for freedom. I will fiercely protect it. And we will always have your backs. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yes.
Well, thanks so much for that. We really appreciate it. And Ashley, I mean, raised a good point. There's a lot of things that are unprecedented now. These mandates we're seeing now, unfortunately, this is not the end of what they're ultimately trying to do. They're going to try to do very more. You look what California, they're not going to let kids go to school unless they do a COVID shot. And that is something that in Florida, parents should rest easy here. They are not allowed to force your kids to do this. That's your decision as a parent, and we'll make sure that we continue to protect that for our school children and the parents, because I know a lot of parents want to be in the driver's seat, even if they want certain things, they still want to be the ones to make the decision. So that is protected. They're not going to be able to get away with that here in Florida. They're not going to be able to take that right away from parents. Now I want to bring up the Surgeon General, Dr. Joe Ladapo.
All right. Hey, good morning. I'm competing with a jet engine back there. So it's just an unbelievable time in the country. It's almost like you wake up each day and you wonder what new unprecedented policy step some leader in, unfortunately, California, a state that that I lived in and really enjoyed, a beautiful state, or even at the executive level with the president is coming out with, and we don't know what's coming next. And this, what we're talking about here today, is really an example of just extreme policies that we've seen during this pandemic, and policies that are implemented without thinking about whether they make sense or thinking about their risks and benefits and what the implications of those policies are. And this is just another example of really terrible policy. I mean, you hear these stories, people telling you what's been happening in their lives, nurses, pregnant women who are being forced to, to sort of put something in their bodies that we don't know all there is to know about yet. No matter what people on TV tell you, it's not true. We're going to learn more about the safety of these vaccines, right? You remember when people were telling you that, that these vaccines would stop transmission and the rates of protection were greater than 90%. Well, guess what? Here we are about 10 months afterward, and we're finding that the data are showing that some of these vaccines, the protection from infection is less than 40%, and even less than that for some of them. So this idea that we are foolish for not believing people who are telling us things that we don't have data for right now is ridiculous, and people need to stick with their intuition and their sensibilities. So talking about science, right? So what is the science? What's the data behind these vaccine mandates? Well, the vaccine mandates, as we now know, these vaccines are not preventing transmission. So sure, they reduce the likelihood of transmission, and even that is sort of questionable depending on how far out you go, but they're not preventing it. So this idea that, I've heard some leaders say things like, we'll create safe workplaces by mandating these vaccines. Well, they're really decoupled, because the infections can still happen whether people are vaccinated or not. I mean, that's very obvious, And you remember, these people were also telling you that all these breakthrough infections that people on, sports stars and celebrities and your neighbors and maybe you were having after you were vaccinated were rare. Well, they're obviously not rare. In fact, they're common. And so that's the truth. So this idea that the vaccine mandates are needed to create safe workplaces is a complete lie. It's continued to be repeated, and you should know that it's not at all backed up by science. In fact, the science says something that's completely the opposite. So, and that's a fact. So then what about the data? What about the science around these, about unemployment, besides the horror, just the repugnancy of firing people who've been showing up to work this whole time during the pandemic to help their neighbors and people in their communities, and now you're firing them. So just putting aside how completely absurd that is. Well, so what do we know about the science of doing that to someone? Well, we know it's bad for health. So when you take away people's jobs, like some of these brave people who've decided to stand with their beliefs and commitments and take the risk, when you take away these people's jobs, it's bad for health, it increases mental distress, it's bad for physical health. People often lose health insurance, so it disrupts their care. I mean, it's bad for health on every level for these people. So that matters. And that's another reason why the governor and I will never support those types of policies.
Yeah.
let's talk about one other thing, right? Which is, well, why are some people not comfortable with these vaccines? Well, part of the reason that some people are not comfortable with these vaccines is because the climate of dishonesty, scientific dishonesty about the science, right? Whether it's natural immunity, denial of that in the face of data, or in the case of the vaccines, open, honest discussions about both effectiveness and safety. So there's been dishonesty around that, and the reality of how safe these vaccines are is absolutely not public. It's not public because when people, and I know this for a fact because patients of mine, colleagues of mine, strangers around the country who've contacted me about their experiences, and just healthy people who've had adverse reactions after the vaccines. There's been a concerted effort to prevent these types of stories, these experiences, from receiving the attention that they obviously should receive. And that's the real thing. And instead what we see is basically shaming and smearing, people using the label anti-vax. And these are the same people who went and got the vaccine. So it's completely ridiculous. Many Americans can sense that there's total dishonesty about the safety of the vaccines. That's one of the things the governor and I are going to work on, and that's part of the reason that people feel uncomfortable. So, it doesn't matter how often some of our public health leaders insist on TV that people have to take these vaccines and they're safe. So these reactions are uncommon, fine. Let's talk about them. Let's talk about how uncommon they are. Let's talk about the myocarditis in children. Let's talk about some of these other reactions that patients are receiving care at the NIH, the National Institutes of Health, for, but are not being publicized. Let's have an open discussion about risks and benefits, and let's be honest. And until that kind of environment is here, people are going to continue to be resistant to the mandates. So the governor and I'm super happy to be working with him. He is a complete believer in honesty and integrity, and so am I, and we're going to work together on this tirelessly and endlessly. So we have your backs. We're going to work like hell to help you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So at the end of the day, I think our mission is very clear. We need to protect the jobs and livelihoods of the people of the state of Florida. Nobody should have their right to earn a living conditioned on receiving mandated injections. We need to make sure that folks are able to succeed and thrive in the state of Florida. And of course, we have a responsibility to stand up for these important constitutional freedoms, stand against federal overreach, and then make sure that our economy is able to function. Because I can tell you, if these airline workers get fired, you're going to see huge interruptions in Florida's economy. And right now, we're doing very well given all the headwinds that we're facing out of Washington. We've been able to overcome a lot of that with the inflation and everything. But just think, is canning a lot of critical workers, is that going to help alleviate inflation, or is that going to drive more shortages and drive more problems in the economy? Obviously, I don't think it's, you don't need to be a rocket science to know it's going to cause even more disruptions and is going to be very, very damaging. So we look forward to working with the legislature when we call them back in November. We think that this will be very, very important for the state of Florida to speak very, very clearly about how much we value the jobs of the people of the state of Florida. Okay, with that, we take yes, sir. So it's a good question. So, we can provide protections at the state level for workers in both corporations and in government agencies. But the question is, if a federal mandate comes in, what are they going to do if that conflicts? And that's one of the reasons why we need to have a two-pronged strategy. Yes, we need statutory protections, and that's why we're doing the special session. But we do need to bring these lawsuits, because the fact of the matter is a federal contractor, if they're looking at a protection in Florida or a mandate of the federal government, they're probably going to side with the federal government because their contract's at stake. And so if we can get legal redress where we can get that enjoined, then we're going to be able to have all those jobs saved. But I think it's going to require both, because I think if a hospital, for example, is told that Florida wants to protect the nurses, but that the federal government wants to force the injections, then the question is are they going to risk all their Medicare and Medicaid funding over that? And I think the answer is they're probably going to make sure they continue to get Medicare, Medicaid funding. So I think it's, we will obviously have a conflict, which will also help us in litigation. But we do need to litigate. We need to legislate and we need to litigate. I think you need to do both. Some people say just file a lawsuit and that's all you need to do. I disagree with that. I think we have a responsibility to put in law what we're for, the protections that we think are important, and to make sure that people understand that even if Biden were to fold up tent and stop doing all this, we still believe these protections would be warranted. Yes, sir. In terms of these mandates? Well, I think in COVID, if you look right now, fortunately, Florida, we have the lowest case rate in the continental United States. If you look at this summer, when people had asked me last spring, like, hey, is COVID over? I said, we'll see an increase in the summer. Now, I don't think anyone thought that we would see Delta increase above what we had the previous summer. And it wasn't just Florida, the whole South had that. Pacific Northwest, Hawaii. But clearly, when we saw that there was a huge gap in early treatment, that the folks that were being admitted to hospitals were not getting any early treatment. And we had 12.5 million, 13 million people vaccinated, but unfortunately, we were seeing people going to the hospital. So we launched the monoclonal antibody program. No one else in the country had done it. We set up 25 different sites in the middle of August. And since we launched that initiative, we've seen daily hospital admissions decline in Florida by 85%. We've seen our hospital census decline, I think now 60 days in a row. The COVID positive hospital census is going very, very low. So that's where we're at. And then our RT value, according to COVIDestim.com, which has probably been the most accurate, our RT value is way, way below 1. I think it's about 0.55, which means the cases are projected to continue to decline, which is a good thing. And so that's just the reality. And even as we brought the kids to school, even as we had a whole bunch of activity, you still saw the cases decline. And so now you're starting to see them increase in other parts of the country. I don't know what's going to happen over the winter. I'm hoping that we have enough immunity built up that we won't see any spikes. But I think we've got to prepare, that these waves come and they go up, they go down sometimes. So we have the monoclonals. We're going to make sure that that is done nimbly. We're going to probably transition some of our sites into the broader healthcare system, but we're going to inform Floridians where you need to go. Fortunately, we're doing a small fraction of the treatments that we were doing in August because we have far fewer infections. So that's a good thing. So that's going to continue to be part of what we're doing. And I think it's obviously shown to have helped an awful lot of people. I mean, I can tell you, if you look at how abruptly the hospitalizations decline from the height of the Delta wave with these monoclonals, we would have had thousands and thousands and thousands of more people that would have ended up in the hospital, and you would have had thousands of more people die. There's just no question about it. So it kept a lot of people out of the hospital, and it saved a lot of lives, and then we need to keep doing that going forward. But fortunately, we're at a point right now, and look, there's times of the year where it's higher or lower. But hopefully, we're getting to a point, having gone through this wave, that we have a little bit more stability over the long term in the ups and downs. But we'll be ready, and we'll make sure that folks get the treatment they need. Yes, ma'am. Sure. So I was able to speak to Gabby Petito's father yesterday about, one, just checking up, see how he's doing. and seeing if there's anything we can do to help. Of course, state law enforcement has been helping with the search from the beginning. We're not obviously driving the train because you have the local and you have the FBI for the interstate. But, you know, he feels really strongly that there's more that can be done to protect people like Gabby who are victims of domestic violence. And I agree with them. I think there's times when we see people who probably should have been held accountable, and then it builds and they do more, and then ultimately it ends to something this tragic. And so I know he's working hard on stuff. You know, I told him, you know, we raise money for different things. We're raising money for Fallen Officers Foundation, families in Florida. We're going to probably do some other stuff with my wife eventually for breast cancer. But I told them, you know, in our charitable endeavors, you know, we want to be helpful. So I think we're going to be able to do it. You know, he doesn't have any more information than what's been reported, at least when I talked to him. So we'll see what ends up happening. But he's a strong fella. I mean, it's a real, probably the worst blow you can receive is to lose a child. And she was just starting out in life, had a obviously, you know, a very, very pretty young lady who everyone seemed to like. And so it's really, really sad. But it also, I think, a lot of us, at least me, you know, were angry that something like this would have happened. And we do want to get all the answers as soon as possible. And I know that would make him feel a lot better. Yes, ma'am. So the question is will this change Florida's status as a right-to-work state? No, we're right-to-work state. You can't be forced to do a union. That's your choice, and that's how, you know, we're going to continue to have it. And so it's more of just a situation where, you know, there's some times when things are so off kilter. You know, we just got to come in and kind of reorient the universe a little bit, make sure we're not losing sight of what's important. And I can tell you, for me, I want a state in which people are able to maintain their livelihoods, earn a living, and provide for their families. And if there's things that are happening, either from the federal government or from big corporations that are hurting that are hurting people, then we have a responsibility to step up and lead and step up and act. And so that's what we're doing here. And I hope that just the fact that we're going into special session will maybe that'll serve as a wake-up call, because I think some of these people that are doing these are doing it because they feel pressure to do it, and I don't know why, but I think that some of them feel like this is something that they just have to do. Well, now in Florida, they're going to know that actually you should be protecting these jobs. That's the policy of the state of Florida. So I look forward to working on this. I look forward to getting some justice for the folks that are standing behind me. And we're going to continue to fight because I think from the very beginning of this pandemic, you know, we've seen assaults on people's basic rights, unlike we've seen in my lifetime, I can tell you that. And Florida's really been the leader in telling and making it very clear people have a right to work. You know, we're going to have businesses open. We're going to have kids in school. We're going to make sure that our economy and our society is able to thrive and that people are protected with their livelihoods. And that's what we'll be doing with these actions. So there's going to be a lot that's happening. I think over the next few weeks, there's a lot that's coming to a head. But at the end of the day, we are standing with folks and we're standing with their jobs, and we're going to protect Florida jobs. Thanks, everybody.